Now let's have a look the L2TP VPN. So what is L2TP and also how to configure the L2TP in our Houston firewall. So L2TP is the layer 2 tunneling protocol, which is the virtual private dial-up network technology that allow the dial-up users to launch the VPN connections from the L2TP clients or the L2TP access concentrators to connect to the L2TP network server via the P2P protocol. After the connection being established, the server will assign the IP address to the legal users and permit them to access to the private network. So L2TP widely used for especially for some mobile users, which they don't need to install any SSL VPN client by using the L2TP, because those systems they already have some building tool for the L2TP connection, connection. So in this case, they don't need to install any other software by using the L2TP to connect to the LNS. So Houston Firewall can work as LNS, which is the L2TP server in the L2TP tunnel network. So the firewall device will accept the connection request from the L2TP client or the LAC concentrators and implements the authentication and authorization. After that, we will assign the IP address together with the DNS server address and the Win server address to the remote users. Because the L2TP protocol do not encrypt for the data, so it cannot assure the security for the data transmission. So in this case, in our decision, we can use L2TP together with the Ipsec protocol. So the encryption will be done, the data encryption will be done by the Ipsec. In this case, we will provide the data secure that transmitted through the L2TP tunnel. Those two are the typical L2TP tunnel network. So one is the tunnel that between the L2TP client and the L2TP server. So in this case, firewall is the L2TP server and the remote users is the L2TP client. Another scenario is the LAC concentrator, that the remote user use the concentrator to access to the LNS, access to the L2TP server. So those are the two scenarios. The configurations for the L2TP over Ipsec, as I mentioned, the L2TP do not encrypt the data for the transition during the process. So we need to use the Ipsec protocol for the data encryption. And L2TP over Ipsec also support the non-Windows operating system. As I mentioned, especially for these remote users, the iPhones, the iPad, Android, or Mac OS, which is an effective component for the SSL VPN solution. If customer they don't want to install any client, they can use the L2TP tool that already built in their computer or mobile phone to access to the L2TP server. Here's the configuration for the L2TP over Ipsec. First of all, you need to configure the basic interface of the firewall, and then you configure the standard Ipsec VPN, and then you need to configure for the local AA authentication server you need to configure for the LNS address pool and also add the IP range to this address pool. You need to create the L2TP dedicated instance and reference the configured IPsec tunnel into this L2TP instance. Then you need to create the tunnel interface and also bind this L2TP instance to the tunnel interface. And then you need to add the policy to allow the traffic from the remote users to the L2TP server. Here is the configurations. First of all, you need to configure for the standard IPsec for both phase 1 and phase 2 proposal. And also, you need to create for both peer configuration. So the main mode, you can use the user group to authenticate for the specific AAA users, And then the connection type. So the server side will be the responder, and you also need to enable the net traversal just in case if there is any in middle net devices, and also accept any peer ID, and also the IKE SA. So add this peer into the tunnel, and also the tunnel, you need to select the transport mode, because this is multiple remote users to your server. So we're using transport, and also use the L2 proxy ID. And you need to accept all proxy ID, because for those remote users that using mobile phones, we don't know their ID. So we just accept all proxy ID. And then we can create a L2TP instance. You can use local authentication server. And this is the interface, the one interface that used for L2TP response. So that is the one interface to listen the request from the remote L2TP client. Also, you need to bind the tunnel interface, the address pool. So this is similar like the SSL. So this tunnel is the gateway for the remote L2TP client. Okay, the IP address in the L2TP tunnel interface must in the same segment with the address pool, L2TP address pool, and not contained in this address pool. And also you need to bind the IPsec instance to this L2TP instance. In this case, the data encryption will be provided by the IPsec protocol. And after that, this is the specific configuration for both of the tunnel interface and address pool I already mentioned before. And finally, you need to specify for the Ppp authentication, which is P2P protocol for the L2TP. So the Ppp authentication, actually we support both CHAP and PAP. So one we use PAP and one we use CHAP. So PAP is the password authentication protocol, which basically works the same way as the normal login procedure, so that the client authenticates itself by sending the username and the password to the server. And the server will compare this login with our local database. So this is vulnerable to invest jobs who may try to obtain the password by listening in the serial line and repeat the trial and error attacks through the PAP protocol. So PAP is commonly used if the authentication server is AD server or LDAP server. If you are using local or other AA server, you can use the CHAP, which is the Challenge Handshake Authentication Protocol. It do not have these differentiations with the CHAP. The authenticator, which is the server, will send a randomly generated challenge string to the client side. Along with the host name, the client will use this host name to look up the appropriate secret, combined with the challenge, and encrypt this string using a one-way hashing, and this result will be returned to the server, together with the client's host name, and the server will perform the same calculating and acknowledges the client if it arrives at the same result. So another feature of CHAP is it does not only require the client to authenticate itself at the start time, but it will send challenges at the regular intervals to make sure the client hasn't been replaced by the intruder. So in this case, the CHAP will be more secure than the PAP. So let's have a look how to configure for the L2TP over IPsec. So first of all, you configure the basic firewall interface, and then you configure for the IPsec proposal. IPsec proposal is quite simple, and also for both phase 1 SA and phase 2 SA. And then you need to create the AA authentication server. In this case, we are using local, and you add the L2TP server address pool, and also the add the IP range to the address pool. And also you need to create the L2TP instance and the then bind the IPsec tunnel to this interface. You need to create the tunnel interface, and then bind the L2TP instance to the tunnel interface. Finally, you need a policy to allow the traffic from the L2TP client to your internal resources. After that, you can use the show command to check the VPN status. So that is the L2TP solution.